Okay, my name is Michael Coveney, as it says on the slide here. I'm the person who's going to entertain you for the next half or hour or so. I do want to say that I've been involved in planning, consolidation reporting all my career. I started in 1974 with a software company. I was very young at the time. I was one of these child prodigies. You know, I am, so I'm not really that old. And I started out actually by helping organisations like British Gas and ICI and British Steel, as they were then, and the National Coal Board. They were still around in those days. And my job was to go along and help organisations plan. And through that time, I used to go and ask organisations, what do you want to plan? What do you want to budget? And I must admit, for the first part of my career, I used to say, okay, you want to plan that, fine. And I used to write it down, I'd write the programmes. But you know, something started to nag me in my head, and I used to start thinking, hold on a minute, why the hell are they doing that anyway? Still, maybe they're brighter than I am, and they're doing something for some reason, I'm not quite sure what it was. But something that I learned, and that's if an organisation has a bad and broken planning process, when you implement new technology to it, you end up with a bad and broken planning process. You see, it's not usually the technology that's broke. It's usually the process and the way you go around planning. Now, I met Kiritz probably early 1990s, something like that, when he was just a child.
That's right.
Same as me, he was one of those other child people. And
Larry to give up our head or the show.
and Kirit and I always had the same philosophy. It's not about the tool. When we go and help organisations, it's about how do we improve the business process that they have. And the technology is just an enabler. That's all it is. I find something very interesting is this. Given that back in the 1970s, I was selling and implementing planning systems with the latest technology, we find today, this according to a recent survey, that most organisations, only around 50 to 60% of the value in a strategic plan is ever delivered to the organisation. Now, it's not because there's anything wrong with the planning, but it turns out, look at this, the number one reason why organisations fail to implement their plans is because of inadequate or unavailable resources. What the hell is budgeting about? Surely budgeting is about making sure there is adequate resources around. We spend 4 months a year getting the budget ready, and for some reason it's out of date within the first month. Why is that? The trouble is that most planning that takes place inside an organisation is really nothing short of a guessing game. You know, it starts out at the start of the year, senior manager have a set of numbers they want the rest of the organisation to guess. And so we implement something like SAP BPC, we hand out the spreadsheets and say, see if you can guess my numbers. So there you are, you type the numbers in for next year, we add them up, and senior managers go, nope, they don't match. Wrong guess. See if you can guess again. So we call this budget pass 2. Right, now what happens in our mentality, we're thinking, I wonder what set of numbers they've got. Let me see if I can guess them. So we guess them again, nope. And of course we go through this process a couple of times, and then what happens is that somebody does a top-down budget process on us. Oh, that was the set of numbers. And do you know what? I love top-down budgeting. Always loved it. Because I've now got a set of numbers that are no longer my numbers. I've got every reason to miss them. And you see, we do strange things. So why is that? I think one of the things that we have to be aware of is that there's this thing called budgetary control. It is the number one management framework in use inside organisations today. In other words, the way that we tend to manage the company is through a thing called budgeting, whereby we hand out. Now, the reason why I put this up on the screen is that the whole concept of annual budgets, quarterly forecasts, monthly reporting was all well established in the 1920s. By the way, this is one of my old motorbikes. It's nearly 100 years old. It was around when budgetary control came out. So what's the point of trying to guess numbers 15 months out when we know they're probably not realistic anymore? No, what we've done, we've actually just come up with a guessing game. And when I talk to organisations about this, they say, "Do you know, Michael, you're absolutely right. There's no point in setting detailed budgets 15 months out. So why do we do it?" "I don't know." "Because we do." "Yes, but why?" "Well, I don't know. We did it last year, so we've got to do it again this year." I think part of the problem is that people don't know what to replace it with. Now, of course, within each activity, there are a series of other activities that take place. So just taking the budget process, there's a whole series of activities that need to be coordinated. And so I'll ask this question again. How often should we do this? Who's going to vote for once a year? Because you're not going to answer that question, because I've already said it was crazy just doing it once a year. By the way, there's this fantastic quote. I just love this one. Dakota tribal wisdom says that when you discover you're on a dead horse, the best strategy is to dismount. Of course, there are other strategies. You can change riders. You can get a committee to study the dead horse. You can benchmark how other companies use dead horses. You can declare that it's cheaper to feed a dead horse. You can harness them, several of them together. But when you've tried all these things, you're going to have to dismount. Isn't that true with businesses? If something's not working, let's stop it. And yet, I meet some organisations say, "No, we've got to wait till the end of the year." I say, "Why?" "Well, because it's in the budget." "Yeah." "Well, you can't change the budget." "Why not? It doesn't make sense." The problem is that given it's taken them 4 months to do the budget, they're thinking, "We can't afford to do this every month." Now, there's some great information about how high-performing companies do this, and unfortunately, I just don't have time to do this. But basically, the top companies make this a continuous process. And it's triggered by events and exceptions as well as the date on the calendar. All right, so what I've described, I believe performance management, whatever we want to call it, CPM, BPM, it doesn't matter. I believe the performance management is actually, it's a bit like driving down a car, okay? The business models that you build are like the engine that mimic the engine working. I think the processes, planning, budgeting process, they're like the steering mechanism to make sure the engine's going the right place. I believe the strategy is the roadmap of where you want to head, and I believe the data that we collect is the fuel which keeps the engine going. Don't you just love those analogies? This one works really well, doesn't it? Is that right? Okay. And that's really what a CPM, a BPM system, this is what you can use the technology for in terms of developing this. Now, you never stop developing this. It is a continuous exercise that you do.